Welcome, Traceable Designers. Today we're making the unique and beautiful Ornate-Scalloped style Lambrequin valance. This valance is easy to adjust for length and width. You can add length to the side panels to completely cover your frame, or you can make a shorter, more traditional cornice style Lambrequin design. This valance can also fit any window size by creating any number of center panels and connector panels. You can also use this as a single-sided valance using only one side panel. Today we'll be using the Ornate-Scalloped style design form from your Traceable Designer kit. Your side panel design form includes sizing lines used to lengthen the panels and sizing lines used to adjust the panel width to best fit your window. You will need to leave room above the form used to make a rod hanging pocket. And the center panel design form includes sizing lines used to adjust the width of the panel, and you'll use the connector panel design form to make small panels to cover the space between the valance panels. Okay, to size your fabric, you need to fold your fabric section in half. You will be positioning the form on the folded fabric edge. Make sure you have plenty of room around the edges, excess above for the rod hanging pocket, and any length that you've added, make sure that you have plenty of fabric with a little margin around the end before you begin cutting your fabric section. Pull out your fusible fabric backing. You're going to attach that in sections. We're going to start with the upper part of the side panels, so you'll make sure that you have enough of the depth to cover the top area, keeping in mind that that fusible backing will be lowered by about 7 or 8 inches to leave room for the rod pocket. So measure across, making sure that gets positioned properly. So I'm marking about 8 inches down. Keep in mind, if you did add depth or length to your panel, you want to add plenty of fusible fabric backing. Then you just line it up along the marks, and then beginning in the center with a dry iron with no steam, with a sweeping motion out toward the side, just take your time to fuse a nice straight piece of fusible backing down on the back side of your fabric section. This is a full open panel used for both side panels. Once that section is complete, then you're going to reposition your design form, lining it up at the top edge of the fusible fabric backing. And now we're cutting 2 sections to cover the bottom area, making sure, again, you have plenty if you are lengthening the side panel. Make sure that it falls inside of where you'll be tracing. So you're going to add 1 panel on the one side with that right in the center. Fuse that down, and then another piece of fusible fabric backing will be positioned on the other side. So when this piece of fabric is folded in half, you have backing on both sides. So that can overlap a little bit, and then just fuse that down. Once the paper has completely cooled, begin peeling that back. You'll do that in sections. Make sure you don't remove the glue. Sometimes that can lift up a little bit. So just take your time. You'll remove all those sections. And then once you have that completely removed, then you're going to cut a piece of lining that is nice and straight across the top, and you'll align that evenly with the top edge of the glue, making sure that the lining does extend past all of the edges so you don't get glue on your iron. And then starting in the center with a sweeping motion, again out toward the sides, getting that nice and fused. Go over it a few times. And this is a pretty large piece of fabric, so you'll be lifting that then and continuing in the center, sweeping out towards the sides, even when there is no fusible backing behind it. Just make it nice and flat, and then continue all the way down to the bottom, fusing your lining to the back of your fabric section. This takes a while. Just continue along until it's completely fused. Pull out your extra long fabric pins and then fold your fabric section in half with the lining side facing out. Make sure you line up the top edge of the lining on the back on both sides, and then pin to secure the fabric. You don't want that to move when you begin tracing. So pin that in a few areas, making sure it's nice and secure. Now pull out your side panel design form and position that along the folded fabric edge, making sure that the upper area or the upper edge of the design form is aligned evenly with the upper top edge of the lining. I'm going to shorten my panel, so I'm going to begin by just tracing the inside edge, following along the design form, holding that down nice and flat. Take your time, trace around the edges so you'll be able to see that line for cutting. Keep checking, make sure it doesn't move. And then once you've completed the inside section, In my particular case, I'm going to adjust the width. If you were lengthening this, you would continue tracing as you moved the form down. So I'm marking off at my width adjustment area there, and then just sliding my form over so that I can trace the edge so that that adjusts the size. To trace the rod pocket area, slide the design form up so the rod pocket arrow is even with the top edge of the lining. This will be positioned straight along with the form along the folded fabric edge, and then we're going to trace off our rod pocket section to straighten that out. The Lambrequin side panel is a pretty large piece of fabric when folded in half. You do have the option of cutting these separately, especially if it's wide and you need more fabric. You can trace on one side, flip it over, and then trace the other side. So now we're going to cut out our Lambrequin form here. So just follow your trace line, holding that fabric down flat against the table as you go. Just follow with nice long sweeping cuts all the way around the cut line. Make sure that when you get around the ornate area there, you do give a nice cut, a nice curve to those points. So you'll just lift it as you go and continue to cut around to cut the shape out. And then once you get around the outside edge, you'll just follow your mark all the way up the side and across the rod pocket area. So it's easier to turn it toward you than trace up the side, and then you'll move the panel again for the cut side facing you to continue straightening out that upper section. Once it's all cut out, remove your pins, and then you need to be able to see that line down the middle. So just use an iron so you have a nice crease, and then you're simply going to split this panel right down the center, and that's going to give you your two mirrored side panels. These panels will hang on the left and right side of your rods, and we're going to make the rod pocket before we do any adjustments. You can adjust this width before you add any trim to your edges if needed. So fold the top section over, leaving a little space between the edge and the lining. You don't want to overlap that. Then iron that down, and then cut a piece of fusible fabric backing to fit right in the center. You don't want to overlap the fold, and then you're just going to fold that over and iron down that fusible backing to both side panels. Your standard rod pocket sizing is wide enough to fit a 3-inch wide pocket rod. So if you want to make that a little smaller, you can adjust it. So just peel off your paper once that's completely cooled. Once that's removed, then you're just going to fold your pocket over, pull that nice and taut. You want to make sure it's very straight. And then take your time ironing this down. You have several layers of fabric, so that's going to take a little while, and you want that nice and secure so it holds properly on the rod when inserted. After you've finished your rod pockets, hang your valance. Make sure you like the width. If it's too wide, you can adjust that. Make sure that you don't need to remove any additional fabric from the inside to make it fit. So if you do have to adjust the width a little bit smaller, all you will do is measure off the required amount. In this case, I'm removing 1.5 inches. So you just measure down the entire side. You can use the design form also as an edge to trace this, or you can just mark it and then just cut that right off, and then you make an adjustment to the width of your panel. Do it a little at a time because you can't add it back, you can only remove it. So then rehang your panels, and in this case you can see those are a little better fit for that window size. When creating your center or connector panels, if you did remove width from your side panels, you'll probably need to add it back in for your center panels. So you will either be using a combination center panel with connector panels. So you will have already determined your sizing on that, and that may need some adjusting. Also, the small connector panel for the Lambrequin for the Ornate is very small. The Scalloped is the same style, it only has more sizing adjustment options. So if you are deciding to use just a connector folded over the rod between your panels rather than a center panel, you may want to use that design form from the Scalloped instead. For this example though, I am going to make a center panel and then 2 connector panels so that you can see how those are made. Begin by sizing your fabric section on the folded fabric edge, making sure that you have adequate fabric above for your rod pocket. You want to make sure where the rod pocket arrow will be positioned, you have enough fabric above and below around the edges. To determine the proper placement for your fusible fabric backing, you're going to leave the area above the rod pocket arrow free of fabric backing. So you just mark that off and make sure that's a nice straight line like you did with the side panels, and that's going to indicate where you're going to position your fusible fabric backing. You want to make sure that's nice and straight because you're making another rod pocket to hang between the side panels. So line your fusible backing up along your marks and then just fuse that down. Take your time making sure that you get that completely fused all around the edges. It makes it much easier to peel the paper back. And then once the paper is completely cooled, just peel that off. Try to keep it in one piece to use when attaching your trim. Again, cut a nice straight piece of lining to line up along the top edge of the glue, making sure that extends past the outside edges. And then beginning in the center again, you're going to fuse that down solid. Then fold that in half with the lining facing out and make sure you line up the upper edges of your lining and then just pin it to secure. Position your design form along the designated sizing line on the folded fabric edge and then just trace your design form around the edges, leaving the upper section again for the rod pocket like you did for the side panels. Beginning on the right outside edge, just trace your center panel. If you were adding length, you would do that at this point by sliding it down. Then you're going to create your rod pocket. So you have your rod pocket arrow on the left. Slide that up. It doesn't have to be on the sizing line. You just make sure it's straight along the fold so that the top edge would be straight. And then you're just going to trace across the top so that you mark off and straighten out your rod pocket area. Then move it back over to your sizing line and then finish tracing on the right hand side of the rod pocket. To cut out your center panel, position the folded edge facing you, hold it down flat against the table, and then just follow your traced line along the lined section and then straight up the side. You'll turn that toward you so that you can get a better grip on it, and then just cut straight up the side across the lining and across the rod pocket section. Then you'll turn the cut side facing you to finish evening out the top area for the rod pocket. Remove the pins and then create your rod pocket. So you'll follow the same steps you did for the side panels, folding that over, leaving a space between the lining and the edge, and then just cut a piece of fusible fabric backing to add to the rod pocket area and iron that down. Once it's completely cooled, just peel the paper back, remove every bit of the paper, don't leave anything on there, and then pull nice and tight, fold it over, and iron down your rod pocket. To make your connector panels, you will size off your fabric, remembering that you need a long enough piece to fold over the rod. You can either add fusible backing and then lining, or you can actually fold it in half and use the same fabric on both sides. That way, when it's seen from behind, it'll have the same fabric. In this case, we're using lining, so just iron that down. Then fold your fabric section in half with the lining side facing out. Make sure that you've lined your fabric up and that you will be tracing on the inside of where the fusible backing is. You don't want to trace beyond the edges and have loose ends. So then you position your connector panel right on the fold, trace the right side over to the folded edge, and then flip it over and then just trace the other side. And if you're using fabric again with fabric that's got a print on both sides, it'll be the same on both sides. Then holding it down, you're just going to cut that out, again following along your traced line, holding it down nice and flat so it doesn't move. That's very important. In this case, I didn't use pins, so you want to really hold that down secure. And then you can see when you fold it over, you won't see the lining anyway. It'll hang in the front of the rod. So when it goes over top of your two side panels, which are put on the rod, this will just fold over to hide the connection between the two panels. Now, even though I have lining on the back, when I fold this over, you won't see it. If you plan to have that hang down behind, you would want the same fabric on both sides. Okay, moving on to your trim, I have a 3/8 inch flat gimp trim. Measure that off to make sure you have enough to cover with a little excess, and then pull out your reserved paper. You want to make sure when you pull that out, you have the shiny side facing up, and then using a hot iron, just pull your trim through to make it flat. And then just cut strips of fusible backing to fit on the back of your trim. With the glue side facing down, obviously, you just move along your trim. This is actually easier than it looks. Position it down and then just continue to iron your trim down without overheating. You can go back over it quickly, but don't overheat. It will deactivate the glue. And then just add all the strips that you need to cover your entire length of your trim. Then peel back the paper, and beginning in the upper corner, I'm right-handed, so I'm using the right side. Fold that around behind the back of the panel, and then just using an iron on the edge, follow along your trim. Adding trim is a slow process. You can keep going back over it and readjusting while it's still warm, and as this trim starts to heat up or warm, it starts to move and curve really nicely, and it's very important to the look of your panels that your trim is very straight and right along the edge. And using this iron-on method is great because you can just keep readjusting it as often as you need until you have that completely secured down. So just take your time with this, make sure you have a nice curve. Then when you get to those points, you really want to exaggerate the points, so just bend the fabric and hold it with your finger. Make sure you don't burn your finger. You can also use a piece of lining if you need to hold that down. Then just hold your iron right on the tip to fuse that. Try not to put your iron over the top of the fabric if you can avoid it, because that can burn or make burn marks. Just continue following along. You can see how the trim begins to curve on its own. So then you can reposition it and then just continue along doing all of the curves nice and straight until you finish at the end, and then just fold that over and fuse it down. Cut a nice straight piece of trim for your outside edge. This is the wall side, and then just fold your edges under and fuse that down. If you have some frayed edges on the side of your center panel here, just cut those off so they're nice and straight. Prepare your trim again and follow the same process. Fold it over the edge, hold it down, and follow along. It's really important that your curve is nice and really curved so that you followed that along. Make sure that you go over it several times, and if you need to readjust the trim, just warm it up. So this is the connector panel. You'll start on one side. I like to start on the side that'll hang in the back, and then just make sure you really follow the curve. I can't stress enough how important it is that the curves are nice and straight and even. So keep checking, and that makes a big difference in how professional your Lambrequin Valance will look. Then just cut the little edge there and fuse that down. That'll be in the back anyway. You won't see it. And then slip your side panels right on your rod with your center panels. You can also use a wide pocket rod or a standard metal rod. And then you'll fold your connector panels over to hide the connection between your panels. And you'll be ready to hang your beautiful new Ornate-Scalloped Lambrequin Valance. Thank you for joining me, Traceable Designers, and remember, you can always make your mark with Traceable Designer.